Hello, friends. This is Austin. Just wanted to take a little bit of time today and talk to you guys. If you haven't heard, we're not having the keep tonight because of the weather. Nothing we can do about it. It's snowing. So I just didn't want tonight to just be okay, we're not having the keep, so we just don't think about stuff at all. I wanted to take a second and still give you guys some stuff that God's been working in my life on, and something that I wanted to share with you guys. It actually comes from First John chapter 3, the first three verses, verses 1 through 3. And it says, Behold, what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. Therefore the world knoweth us not, because it knew him not. Beloved, now we are the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And every man that hath this hope in him purifieth himself, even as he is pure. So what's going on in these verses is John is looking forward to the goal of the life of a Christian. See, I thought this was really cool because we've been talking about Revelation for the last few weeks, and we've been talking about the future, and we've been talking about kind of how our life is working toward this thing, right? How our life is working toward this future. And even though we're not going to be around for most of Revelation, even though we're going to be in heaven and we're going to be worshiping God, we've been looking at the end result of God's plan in a lot of ways. And I thought this was a really cool thing to kind of take a step back from. And in the same way, look at our own future and look at our own goal and what we're working towards ourselves. And what I love about these verses is that it starts by talking about God's love. And John, who is the same John that's writing Revelation, so it's cool that we're getting this perspective from him, is he is blown away by God's love that he's given to us. Because he's calling us sons and daughters of God. He is putting us in this family relationship with God, which we talked about before is awesome because that's basically putting us in the same line, the same vein, the same perspective as Jesus, the Son of God. And John is just blown away by the fact that God has taken a step outside of his way of doing things when he sent Jesus. And through Jesus is showing us his love by saying, okay, now we have the chance to be part of God's family. And then he throws in this little thing, therefore the world doesn't know us because it doesn't know Jesus. And it's like, why is that little negative thing in there? It's because John, like the rest of the disciples, saw in his life, he saw a lot of negativity. And John saw a lot of struggle, and John saw a lot of people that didn't want to see him succeed and didn't want to see the Christians succeed. And he made sense of this not by saying, well, it's just not fair, and he didn't go through and say, well, I just wish that people understood us or people loved us or that people would help us. And instead of like doing that, instead of making excuses and instead of saying like this whole list of reasons of why they couldn't reach people or why they couldn't make a difference in the world, he says, well, the world's not going to understand who we are because they don't understand who Jesus is. But he's saying this with the understanding of, okay, they didn't know Jesus, so they don't know us. But now we have a responsibility. And it's this interesting thing between us and God, where God's love gives us something that we never could have earned, and we couldn't have deserved. We couldn't have ever gotten to the point where we could go up to God and say, God, look, I've worked hard enough and I've done enough good, and I think I really deserve to be considered your son or your daughter. And there's nothing that we could have ever done that was good enough where God would look at it and say, oh yeah, you know what, you're as good as I am. You deserve to be in my family. But despite that, despite our failures, despite our shortcomings, despite our struggles, God has shown us his love and his mercy by what the Bible says are bestowing. Basically, like it's like putting a medal, like in the Olympics, like when someone wins a gold medal, someone puts that medal on them. And here's God saying, okay, in our spiritual Olympics, you haven't earned this, you haven't actually done anything, but I'm still going to put this title on you. I'm still going to put this title on you. And now in verse 2, he takes it a step even further. Now we are the sons of God, but we don't know what we're going to be. It says, it doesn't appear yet what we shall be. We don't know our own future. You know, it's like when we become a Christian, we know one thing for sure, and that's God has a plan for us. You know, he says he'll never leave us, he'll never forsake us. He says he has plans for good, not for evil. So the one thing that we know is that God has a plan for us. But what we don't know is everything else that comes with that. You know, what we don't know is that everything else could work out one way or another way, and there's no way for us to know what that way looks like. But then he says, but we do know this. We know that when he shall appear, when Jesus comes back, when he comes back as a king, when he comes back as the leader of the world, when he comes back in his rightful place, we know that we will be like him. So when I'm saying that God's basically offering us a position almost equal to Jesus, it's not me making this up, and it's not me like taking this further than it deserves to be. It's that's what John's saying. You know, when Jesus comes back and he is the King of Kings, he is the ruler. John here is saying when that happens, we're going to be like him. We're going to be perfect. We're going to be in this position of relationship with God like Jesus is, where there's power and there's authority. And God in his love is offering us that position. It says we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And then when you look at verse 3, you get to the application. See, John was really cool because the disciples all had their own personalities, and they all had their own like things that made them unique. You know, Peter was quick to action. You know, Peter hears that maybe Jesus' grave is empty, and he takes off running. You know, Peter chopped the guy's ear off because he threatened Jesus. Peter was quick to act. And Matthew, you know, you look at the book of Matthew, Matthew loved facts. You know, Matthew loved presenting Jesus as the king. He is the king of the Jews. He is the one that fulfills all these prophecies. You look at Luke. Luke was a doctor, you know, and Luke was very detailed, and Luke loved the intricate stuff. But John was a little different because John was a great storyteller. John's gospel, the book of John, it talks about the same stuff that other gospels talk about. It talks about Jesus' life on earth. It talks about what he did. It talks about what he said. But everything that he talks about is presented in a different way. And it's different than the other three gospels because it comes across more like a story. And it comes across more like something that is leading to something. It's going somewhere. It's the difference between, okay, here's a law document and here's the rules, point A, point B, point C, and it goes down the list. It's more like, okay, here's the information and then here's what to do with it and then here's how it's going to change your life. And that's what John's doing here. Here, John is, look, God's love is awesome, and it'll blow you away. It's mind-blowing. And the world doesn't know us because it doesn't know Jesus. But that's not an excuse because now we're the children of God, and God has authority. Jesus has authority. And now God's putting us in a position much like that. So we have authority, and we have a responsibility, just like Jesus did, to minister to the world that's around us. And then in verse 3, because he's a good storyteller, because he's moving this to a point, he finishes this thought with this. And every man that has this hope, everyone that has this hope in him purifies himself, even as he is pure. And this one sentence, John is summing up a much more complicated thing. John is summing up the idea of purification and sanctification. And the idea of that is when you accept Jesus, when you start this relationship with Jesus, God makes you his son or his daughter. God puts you in that position of, just like Jesus is perfect and has this authority. You're a Christian now. You have that authority and you have that relationship with me. And Jesus forgives your sin, and God sees you in his mind as perfect. There's nothing left to pay for. There's nothing that you have to make up for. Jesus paid for it all. Like you're clean. You're pure. But John here is saying, but how that looks in your life is you don't walk around like, I'm a son of God. I'm a daughter of God. I've got it all figured out. I'm never wrong. John's saying that's not how this works. God sees us as pure. God sees you as pure. But we have this understanding in our lives that if we're honest with ourselves, we know we're not pure. We know that we struggle. We know that we have shortcomings. We know that there's things in our life that are wrong. And if we don't admit that to ourselves, if we focus too hard on, well, I'm pure in God's eyes, that's great, that's awesome, that's such an important part of the Bible, and it's such an important part of what Jesus wants us to know. But if that's the end of it, then we're not doing ourselves a favor. We are skipping half of the battle. We're overlooking half of everything God wants us to know. He wants us to know we're forgiven. He wants us to know that he sees us as perfect. But he also wants us to know, look, sin is still sin, and if it's wrong, it's wrong. And there's a lot of ways in our life where it's like easy for us to skip over, well, it's not really that big a deal, or it's not that bad. But John is saying, part of our responsibility and part of our relationship with God is, even though he sees us as pure, even though he sees us as he sees Jesus, which is completely without fault, in our lives, we should still be working, we should still be attempting, we should still be moving towards wanting to be more pure like Jesus until we reach the point where we are like him. See, this is what I'm talking about when I talk about our own personal future. See, Revelation tells us the future of God's plan. It tells us the future of the world. It tells us the future of what he wants to do with it. But this tells us the future of us. It tells us the future of your life. It tells us the future of God's plan for you. And that future is this, that someday in the future, whether when Jesus comes back or we die to go be with him, when we're in heaven with him, like, we are going to be perfect. In heaven, there's not going to be sin. We're not going to be struggling with things anymore. We're not going to be having to try to do our best in every situation to do the right thing, because there's not going to be any sin. It's not something that we're going to have to worry about. But our personal future right now, until that happens, is a progressive one. It's one that's always moving towards Jesus. And if we want our relationship with God to be closer, if we want our relationship with God to be better, if we want to move towards Jesus in our lives, then we also have to move towards Jesus in how we act. We have to move towards Jesus in how we react to sin. And this is what John's saying. Every man that has this hope of this personal future of knowing someday we're going to be with Jesus and we're going to be like him and we're going to be perfect and we're not going to have to worry about sin. Everyone that has that hope, everyone that's looking forward to that right now should also be trying to come closer to that right now. Right now, we should all be trying to be more pure. And that's how we think. We talked Sunday about temptation. If it's trying to cut off temptation as soon as it happens, if it's trying to avoid situations in our lives that tempt us, like, that's great. That's part of it. If it's sin that we know we have in our lives where we've already fallen toward temptation, where we've already let that take us, then purifying our lives means identifying those areas, identifying our struggles, identifying the sin that we've let come into our lives, and instead of letting it lead us to death, like we talked about on Sunday, instead of letting it rip our lives apart, even though we've already fallen to the temptation and now it's sin, we cut that out now, and that's purifying us too. And this all goes back to the idea of our relationship with Christ isn't a one-time thing, right? It's not a stamp of approval. It doesn't end at God putting that medal on us. It doesn't end at God starting this relationship with us. It's a relationship that starts and is moving somewhere, moving to this future that John is telling us about, but through this process that John is making sure we understand that I'm not perfect today, even though God sees me that way. I'm not perfect today, even though I'm going to be when that happens. But I should be living my life with the goal of being more perfect tomorrow than I am today, and being more perfect next week than I am right now. And that should be the goal that we all have. Am I going to fail? Yes. Are you going to fail? Sorry, yes. But that's the process. It's the process of purification, the process of identifying our failures, our struggles, and overcoming them by the power of God. Not by being a better Christian, not by trying to do better, not by trying to work harder, but by trying to let our faith in God overcome the convenience and the easiness and the overwhelming position we find ourselves in where sin's easy and convenient. So it's trusting God to work in us. And then it's letting God actually do that work. A lot of times we pray or we're open to God and we're like, God, I know that I need your help. I know that I need you to work in my life. But then when he actually starts doing it, we react kind of like, whoa, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean like that. And if we're going to be more like Jesus, we've got to have the same attitude that he had. When he was praying in the garden, he was scared and he didn't want to go through with being crucified because he knew the pain that it would cause, and he knew the sin that he was about to have to pay for. And he prayed, God, if there's any other way, let's do it that way. But he said, whatever your will is, God, that's what I want. And that should be our attitude. You know, even if God working in our lives and purifying us and making us more like Jesus kind of feels like that, where it's like, if there's any other way to do this, I want to do it that way. I didn't mean for it to be this hard. I didn't mean for it to be this difficult. I didn't mean for me to have to give up this other stuff that I didn't think was connected to it. When God says, you got to give it up, you got to give it up. And that's just what I want you guys to understand today. Since we can't get together and we can't talk about Revelation and we can't talk about that, I wanted to talk about this. Wherever you're at in your life today, wherever you're at in your life this week, let's have the attitude of, God, whatever you need to do in my life, even if it hurts, even if it doesn't feel good, even if it's not what I wanted you to do, let's take the time, the opportunity that we have right now, and let's say, God, I trust you. And let's say, God, I know I need you and I have faith in you, and whatever you think needs to happen in my life, whatever you think you need to do, you're free to do it, and I'm going to let you do it. And I'm going to trust that your plan for me is better than my plan for me. So if we can do that, God's going to use us. And God is going to do more than just use us for the sake of being used, but he's going to use us to do awesome things that we didn't think were possible with our life. And the more of us get on board with that, and the more of us are together on that, the more we have a unified heart towards that, then it just multiplies exponentially. And that's what I want to see us do as the Keep, as individuals, is I want us to completely surrender to God's plan for our lives, and for us to work together to see how he's going to use us in that plan. So thanks for your time today, guys. I know that was a long video, but I wanted you guys to know where my heart's at today. And I hope that it has something in your life too. I hope that there's some significance in it that you can find, that you can see how God is talking to you tonight too. So I appreciate you guys. If you've watched it this long, you're awesome. I appreciate your time, and I can't wait to see you guys soon. But whatever ends up happening, whatever you guys end up doing tonight for the rest of this week, guys, I love you, and just let God speak to you through his word, through your praying, and through what he has for you this week. And just look forward to seeing you, look forward to seeing how God's going to work in your lives, and we'll get together soon. Have a good night. We love you.